Both heads are done with valves. Now we're going to show you how to put the IAG Firelock head gaskets in and 14mm head studs. They're enormous. So this is 14mm studs on the left versus a standard replacement head stud on the right. And as you can see, there's 14mm washers and nuts for the studs versus the stock replacement one. These are actually 11/16 12-point nuts that you need to get a socket for, so don't forget. They look pretty big, especially when they're on the engine. We did the other side already, and then we're going to show you this side. So we're going to make this video because IAG's instructions aren't very clear as far as the head gasket with the Firelock rings. Okay, we're on the next part of the cylinder, or the Forester build. Cylinders are back from the machine shop. So what you didn't see off camera is we manually lapped all the valves. We cut new seats in them. And then we put them in order. Once they're cut, they pretty much need to go in the same spot. So drop some cardboard, put them in order, lubricate the valves, and you pop them in. You can't really mix up intake and exhaust because they're different sizes, but you definitely want to get them in the right cylinders. And then make sure you have your valve stem seals in first, which we did off camera. They just clip in there. The exhaust are green, intake are gray in color if you're doing this. These used heads cleaned up pretty nice.
One complete.
Let's focus. They look pretty good. We're going to test these for leaking before we bolt them on. If you flip it over, you can see these also had to be clearance for the big cams, so you wouldn't normally have these cutout spots, but we had to. Alright, next clip we'll put in the we got Beehive springs and retainers from Kelford, but we're going to put the valves in this one first. Okay, the next step after the valves is to flip the heads over and start installing the retainers and springs. So this step is going to be for Kelford's titanium Beehive springs and retainers. So it might be different for you. You will need some sort of tool, Company 23, or you could make your own, but this one's pretty nice. So these are the retainers. This tool goes with it. The springs are right here. This is for like high RPM, high horsepower. There's the part number. Kelford sells them as a kit. Let me focus that. This is for like all 2.5 Subarus. There you go. Oh, and 2 liters apparently. So these look a little bit different than stock and they're way stiffer. So you actually can't put this tool on until you slide the spring on because they're taller than the stock springs. But we're going to show you how to do one and then we'll put you on time lapse. We just made sure that everything went okay doing these two. This part sucks. These little clips really don't like to snap together. So it is a pain in the butt. We found that using grease on your finger and on those seems to work the best. So we're going to show you how to do one.
Make sure you get these guys. It isolates the spring from the aluminum head.
So these have a ridge. The ridge goes up towards the spring sits around it.
Drop the second one in over here.
Yeah, like that. Okay.
Okay, then you got 2 springs.
Springs are not directional, right? They're just...
They are directional, so the taper goes up. It only fits one way. These also only fit one way.
Okay. So if something's not lining up right, you got to spring backwards.
The stock ones are not directional. They could go either way. So you get that. And then you get the tool.
So normally you can put the tool down and then slide that in, but since these springs are taller, we figured out that you actually have to put that little compressor tool on first.
And we do have a rag underneath the cylinder head to try to keep the valves from being pushed down. And then we compress the valve or the spring.
So because these are stiffer springs, as you compress this down, we actually have to use our fingers and push this to the center more so you don't hit the valve stem, but on the stock ones I'm not sure that you'd have to do that. It's not hard to do, you just have to make sure that it doesn't bind up as it goes in.
You crank it down a good way, give yourself some room to put the retainers in, the clips are going to come.
Okay, that looks far enough.
There's a little groove in there which you probably can't see,
So you get the focus there. It's kind of.
which the clips go around. There you go. So you need enough room to put them in.
I kind of found it was better to stick these to your finger with some grease.
Yeah. The kit comes with a magnetic screwdriver, which is very strong, but unfortunately it sticks to everything.
So you just get them stuck to your finger. It's hard to see in that, but they're actually conical.
I'll hold still. It's not focusing in. So it's there you go. It's tapered on one side, so you have to make sure you put them in right.
You have to kind of put it on the very tip of your finger.
And then you rotate it out of the way. So you can put the other one on.
You're gonna get your fingers dirty doing this one. Hope you like grease on them.
We've been using a pick too to help align them if we need to, but we just got that one pretty good. So
I got pretty lucky on that one.
you can see them in there, covered in grease. And then as he loosens it, it's going to sandwich them together, and I'm going to hold this right here if I can.
Okay.
And it'll wedge right against the top of that stem. These ones are pretty stiff too because they're the beehives. The stock ones would be easier.
Back the camera up just a hair here so I can get this. Go.
They wedged into place, and then when you pop the tool out, it'll look just like these. You can clean the surface off if you want to, but they look just like those.
We just found you have to back this tool off to get the other side set for this to transfer over.
And that's it. I'm going to set up on a time lapse while we knock the rest of these out because it's going to take a while. So first thing you want to do is make sure that your block is completely clean before the head gasket goes on. There's no turning back after you bolt this down, especially with Firelock. You'd have to get it remachined. And then also make sure that the face of the head is clean. And we're going to get started. So the easiest thing we found is to thread the bolts in first, because the middle ones won't really pass through the head gasket very easy if you try to slide it. So it's easier to actually set the head gasket on and thread the bolts into it. And in order to do that, we have to lubricate the engine side of the threads on the studs very lightly. Then you're going to thread them in and make sure there's no resistance, and let any excess residue drip out, and then torque these to 10 foot-pounds using a 3/16 Allen that's on the end. So you don't have to, the old style before 2018 you had to use a double nut system, but this one has it on the end. So these rings, you actually push them into the groove that's cut in the block, kind of line them up, and then...
I've been kind of spinning them to make sure that they're in there. Seem to fit.
Seems like it's easier to put these in first and then set the head gasket over it. The head gasket goes around it anyways, it's not like you have to press it in there, so...
You do have to put these dowel pins in.
Yeah, you're gonna hate yourself for the alignment dowels with the 14mm studs, because they have to be hollowed out or split. And even though IAG does that for you, if you order the kit, as soon as you try to put them in here, they want to like become wavy because they're so paper thin, and then the bolt won't go through. So you have to be really gentle with this, which is why we tried it on the other side first, and it's a pain in the butt. That one went in pretty decent. And the bolts barely want to fit through, so you kind of got to wiggle them through.
Yeah, I kind of had to force them with the Allen a little bit, but they...
Now we're going to put the head gasket on.
Just like a cork style material, it feels like.
Yeah, it feels kind of sketchy because
It actually
normally
goes upside down with the words down too, but there's no way for them to go the other way.
Okay, so words go down then you put the gaskets on. It feels kind of sketchy using a non-MLS style head gasket on a turbo car, but
yeah.
all the sealing is done with the ring, so this is basically just to close the surfaces.
I'm just trying to make sure these are perfectly aligned right. No kind of issues here.
You definitely want to take your time, because like we said, once you put the head on and you sandwich it down, you actually have to redeck the head because these rings will cut into it. So unlike normal cars where you can just take it off and redo it, these ones are one time.
Now these studs you do want to oil.
Per ARP's instructions and on IAG's website, you want to use a little bit of motor oil, very lightly.
Not much at all, just a very little bit, just to keep the threads from sticking in there.
They actually say that they want you to turn the block upside down and let the excess drain off. I think assuming that you're gonna put too much on, so we're just doing a very fine coating, just so there's no squeaking or resistance when we're threading these in. And as you can see, you have to thread the studs into the head gasket in the center. They're just big enough that they have to be threaded in and they can't really be pushed through. And if you're not using Firelock head gaskets and you're using 14mm studs, you will actually have to drill your head gaskets out. So you bottom these out a little bit, and then you torque them to 10 foot-pounds. Okay, once you have them all bottomed out, you're going to torque them to 10 foot-pounds. We're using an inch-pound one, but this This is just to make sure that they're bottomed out completely. Then once you do that, you're going to take a micrometer according to ARP. You're going to use the bottom side of it, and you're going to push it down and measure with the flat spot and make sure that they're all the same length. So if you want to hold that, normally you use them like this between something, but you're going to use the bottom this time. This is a manual one. A lot of you guys will have digital ones, so you're just going to slide it down, and then you're going to set it on the head and push it until the block touches the stud, and you have your measurement. And then when you read it, this one's in inches, so it's 3.892, and then you're just going to make sure that all the other ones are the same when you push them in. So like that one's the same there. That one's the same there. You're just going to make sure you check them all so that they're all threaded in the same. Okay, once you do that, you're going to apply the ARP fastener lube. It says to the top 5 or more threads. We kind of use the width of our finger and go around the threads all the way. I mean, if anything, more is better than less. You just have to wipe some away because this keeps make sure there's no resistance when you're torquing them down. So we will spread all these out, and then once you do that, you're going to put the head on. But in the meantime, you might want to prep your washers. These washers come with a preservation lube or whatever on them so they don't rust. So you actually need to clean these off. ARP says they need to be completely dry and free of any contaminants. So we wipe those off with brake cleaner and then a clean rag and let them dry. And then we clean the bottom of the nut off too, because you're actually going to apply a fastener lube to that later on. So these we've already cleaned, but you might want to do that. And then I'm going to set it on the stand here when we put the head on, because it's, with how big these studs are and the head's having to be drilled out, it's a snug fit, so we're going to do 2 people. Alright, then you bring your head over gently. And then you can get a rubber mallet if you want to, so that you can get it on the alignment pins. Alright, now you're going to take your cleaned off washers. And drop them in.
Let me get a shot of the washers going in. It's a lot easier to put the assembly lube on before you put the head on. It's really hard to get down into these little spots. That's the only reason we did it that way.
And as you can see, it doesn't really look like any of it came off while putting the head on. If it did, you could get a small brush and reapply some, but this seems to be the best way. Got the washers in. You really see how big the head studs are once you put them in the head itself there. Okay, and then once the heads are in, like I said, you're going to clean off the back of the nut on a paper towel, and then you're going to apply the ARP lube to the back of the nut only.
I already did clean.
Thread them on there. Yeah. Now you're going to set them on. And then the studs look even bigger because the nut barely fits in there. It gets everywhere, just like UNIC's. Okay, so that was step 1, 35 foot-pounds in the center, 25 on the outside, 4 in the factory pattern. Then we move up to 70 foot-pounds in the center.
60 on the outer.
So the outer is always like 10 foot-pounds less until the final step when they all go to 155. So if we're going 60 on the outside, and then I'm going to set the camera down because we need to have both of us stabilize as we get higher in the torque range. Now we're going to 105 in the center.
And 95.
105 pounds.
But it really, the size of those studs, it really doesn't feel like it's scary at all. Like it's, I mean, it's a lot of torque, but it doesn't feel like you're going to strip anything out. It just takes it very well.
We thought it would feel like it was stretching like crazy because you wouldn't torque the normal ones nearly this much, but they feel good. So now we're going to 130 in the center. Should be 120 on the outer.
Yep.
Okay, now we go to 155 all the way around. Now you can wipe the excess lubricant off if you choose. It's on top there. You have to do the first brake-in oil change after 50 miles, so it wouldn't be in there long. We'll give it a quick wipe down, and as you can see the valves and the retainer's pretty good now too. So this head is good to go. We have WRX spark plugs in it because we water tested it for leaks and we didn't want to use good plugs, so those are the wrong plugs if you notice that they weren't in the head all the way. But that's it. We're going to wipe it down and get started on the rest of it. Now that the heads are on, the next thing to do is we have Kelford cams, so we need to put our buckets in and cams and everything, but we are waiting on some buckets, and then we'll show you guys how we measure those for clearances based on the Kelford guide that they send out. So the easiest way to do this is most likely your heads came with buckets, so just go ahead and put those right back in. And then you are going to take your cams. If you're using new cams like these Kelfords, you need to make sure you clean all the grime off of them. It says to in the instructions anyways. And then lubricate where it rides in the heads. Then you're going to want to put them on, torque them down to the OEM sequence. The middles and outsides have different torque. And then use a feeler gauge to measure the gap. And then you're going to use this formula. S equals V plus T minus 0.20 for the intake and minus 0.35 for the exhaust if it's a stock cam. But those numbers get switched with the spec of your cam. So right here at Kelford's thing, it says to set them cold, 0.20 on intake and 0.25 on exhaust. So we modified the formula for that. And basically you're going to measure T is the thickness of the bucket you already have. V is going to be your feeler gauge readout, and then you subtract your perfect tolerance, and then what you get is S, which is your target. So what it looks like is this. So on this cylinder we had a 488 bucket. We measured a 0.30 gap, and it's an intake valve, so we used that formula there and came up that we needed to switch that to a 4.98 instead of a 488, and that would set the clearance to be exactly 0.20. You go through and you do that for all of them, and then you should be good. So what you'll have to do is once you figure out all these, then you take them back apart, and you either have to order new shims, or if you're lucky enough to have a bunch of old ones like we are, this massive collection courtesy of David and Kyle. So these all are used in new buckets that are in good shape, and then inside of each one is the measurements that you look for. So basically we're just going through right now and looking for the new numbers that we read. So we're looking for a 498, a 496, a 495, a 494, etc. And then we're going to lay them out, and then we're going to put them back in, retorque the cams down, and check. And you might have to do that a few times. Sometimes you can just reorder the buckets that you already have. If you need a 496 here and you happen to put a 496 in originally somewhere else, then you got lucky. But so we're going to comb through these and do that, and then you just repeat for all of them. Make sure you use the right formula with the right specification if you're using aftermarket cams, you have to go by the sheet that comes with the cams where it says how to set the valve clearance. Otherwise, you can use the factory specs, which is 0.20 on the intake and 0.25 on the exhaust. This is the Subaru Tech bolt in there. So you can see there's the formula and the stock clearances. Okay, so here we've selected, we're doing one head at a time. So here is our 8 buckets that we're going to swap out based on the calculations. So all you do is get a magnetic stick. They're pretty hard to grab without a magnet, so I definitely advise getting one. You're going to pop all these out, and then carefully, based on your drawing diagram, we recommend drawing the head out, like the front of the motor, the exhaust port, and then put them in the exact order, the ones you need, otherwise you'll have to do this over and over again. So here's the 8 that we're going to put in.
So this is a 498, goes here.
And just pop in nicely. You're also going to want to visually inspect the buckets if you're using used ones, make sure there's no like cupping or weird wear marks. It's advisable to use new buckets with new cams if you're going to be doing a race application, because technically the cam profile will wear differently than the stock one. But if these cams are lightly used or they look like they're in very good shape, you can choose to reuse them. It's kind of a preference thing. Torque to 14.5 foot-pounds or 174 inch-pounds. So you put them on your torque wrench. You do want to take the time to torque these every single time because that sets your final gap.
We're going.
Okay, so you want to grab your feeler gauges, make sure that you're reading millimeters. So the bottom one, so 0.20 is what we're looking for the intake.
There it is, it's focusing.
So once you have that, you go through, you make sure that the lobe's up and down, or as up and down as possible. You check it and you want it to be snug but not resisting. So right there's a little bit of pressure pulling back, but I can push it through with no effort, but it won't wiggle, so that's perfect. You check the next one. That one's still slightly tight. So then you want to go down to the next one. If you're using used valves, obviously they could be a little bit worn, so we'll go down to a 0.178, which is the next one down. That one's still a little bit snug. So then you would go down one more, 0.152, and that fits how it should. So this one we'll have to redo again. This takes a couple times, so you're going to write down, this will be your new value in your formula that you will substitute, and then also with the new bucket you put in, then I'll come up with your new number. And then you're going to do the same thing for the rest of these.
Show us how you write that number down.
So these are the ones we started off with last time. So on cylinder 1 intake again, and so we had a 488 before, we put a 498 in, so that's the starting number. That one, it took exactly a 0.20, which means that our new formula would return us a 4.98 again, which means that one's good to go. The next one, we put in a 4.96. I just measured a 0.152. So when you do the formula, you add those two together and subtract 0.20. So you do 4.96 minus 0.152. I'm sorry, 4.96 plus 0.152 minus 0.20. So we need to put a 4.91 in here now. And then we're going to go through that with the rest of them, and we'll check them again.
And you gotta look through all these for a 491.
Okay, once you have your buckets all adjusted, you are going to want to grease your cams up. So Kelford gives you this package that they want on the cam lobes and any riding surfaces like the buckets and whatnot. So you're going to want to put the assembly grease on the lobes and then put the assembly lube, the non-Kelford stuff, on those. You can put your back shims on. If you're using AVCS heads, you need to, sorry for it being out of focus, if you're using AVCS heads, you need to clean any residue off of the cam carrier bracket and also where it meets on the head. And then you are going to use some Fuji Bond or whatever gasket maker you want to use. This is the real Subaru 3 Bond. And you are going to want to apply silicone or Fuji Bond on the far sides from all the way back to all the way front. And then in the middle, you're going to want to go on the inside of the holes where the groove is, across here, and then on the far side. And then go ahead and put it on the head, and then we will torque it down. Fuji Bond. Subaru calls for a 3mm bead. You don't want to put too much on because you don't want it to get into the head, but a nice little bead like that, just so that it doesn't leak. Like that. Okay, once you have that, then carefully make sure that your cams are lubed where the journals are going to be, since this one won't have a lot on it, and then carefully set this down. You will have to push down some because of the alignment pins. If you don't use too much, then it won't seep inside. That's what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and put these bolts in. You are going to torque the 4 main bolts here and 4 here to 14 foot-pounds, and then the outsides just go to 7 foot-pounds. Okay, the next step, once you're ready to put the valve covers on after you've sealed the cam carriers up, is to go ahead and put your valve cover gaskets on. These are STI valve covers, so your WRX ones won't have this flat spot. And the STI valve covers use a shouldered bolt like this. They do not use grommets around the bolts. If you're doing the WRX early model, you need to make sure you get those. They go on the outside. So once that's ready, you're going to clean off your surfaces. Make sure you replace your half moons. We're going to be using metal ones on this head, but the stock plastic ones will be fine. So for those, you're going to want to put a thin metal of sealant in the groove in the center. If that'll focus, you can see a groove cut in the center of the half moon. Fill that with sealant, put it down, make sure that it's level, and then you might want to put that down and then put the valve cover on at the same time. That way when you tighten the valve cover down, it will seat the half moon flat. Otherwise you have to make sure that you get it flat. You do need to apply Fuji Bond to this as well. Subaru recommends doing the loop along the AVCS controller up and around, and then in the bottom corner where the cam carrier bracket meets, a little bit down there, and then over top of where your half moons are to provide some extra sealant. So you're going to want to lay that down and then put your valve cover on. So we will do that now. Definitely get them as flat as you can. So on that little crack there, across the half moons, And then around the top. Okay, then you take your valve cover, make sure that everything is pressed in nicely. Set it on. There are different lengths. The longer ones go in most of the regular holes, and the short ones go where the shallow mounting points are. Kind of self-explanatory, but do know that there are some different length bolts. So you can see the shorter ones need to go where the shallower mounting goes. Otherwise it would bottom out. Torque them to 4 foot-pounds.